Okay, I'm not quite sure whether I'm supposed to just crack on or whether I'm waiting to be announced or something. So I shall, unaccustomed as I am, announce myself and crack on with the talk, which is on including autistic people at work, removing barriers and challenging discrimination. So first of all, to introduce myself, that's me. I'm Janine Booth, and I worked for over 25 years as a London Underground station supervisor. Apologies for that. We do lots of different stations, lots and lots of different stations. I started and ended at the same station, actually, at Oxford Circus. But worked at many dozens of others during the time. But I'm now a trainer at Red in the Spectrum. So I left London Underground last year, and now I do this kind of stuff all the time. And I'm also a railway content writer, because despite having left London Underground, I'm still very nerdy about railways. So I write stuff for websites. And I am autistic, also unconfirmed but very obvious ADHD. And apparently specific learning difficulties of a dyslexic type. That's what the document said anyway. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk, before I talk about work, I want to talk about the medical model and the social model of disability. I'm sure some of you have heard of this, some of you might not have heard of it, but it's fantastic. So what we're talking about here is different ways of understanding disability, okay, within society. There are quite a few different ways, different models for understanding disability within society, but the two main ones, the main ones I want to address are the medical model and the social model. So the medical model is, if you like, the traditional way of thinking about disability, the way we were probably all brought up to think about disability. And essentially, a medical model approach is one that says it sees the impairment as the cause of disabled people's disadvantage, and therefore concludes that what disabled people need to be is fixed, treated, or in some way carried as a burden by society, cared for, cured, pitied, segregated. And although some of the more offensive manifestations of the medical model have been dropped as a result of a few decades of enlightenment and campaigning, it does still dominate political and legal decision-making. In the 1970s, there was a new radical self-organised disabled people's movement, and it focused on the demand for the right to live independently in society, the right to participate in society on an equal basis to everyone else. And they soon realised that if they were going to win the argument for that, they would have to challenge the whole way that society views disability. And so they labelled the way of looking at disability that I've just described, the traditional way, as the medical or individual model. And they drew up a new model which became known as the social model of disability. And this is the essential difference. Social model distinguishes between impairment and disability, okay? So it says an impairment is a trait or it's a shortfall in functioning, but disability is the difficulty caused to people with impairments by barriers that society puts in their way, okay? And I think for autism, we need to and other forms of neurodivergence, we can tweak this model a little bit, because for some people our autism isn't even an impairment. It's a difference. But it's significant enough a difference that we are still disabled by barriers in society. And you might notice that the social model, as well as being more progressive and more accurate, is actually more practical. Because under a medical model approach, if you can't fix someone, then there's not much you can do for them. Okay, but under a social model approach, you identify the barriers and you remove the barriers. So let's have a look at how these two models might describe autism and autistic people. A medical model approach might say, some people have a disorder called autism, which is a disability and causes them various problems. And that's probably quite a common view, isn't it? Saying practically the same thing from a social model point of view, though, you might say, autistic people have atypical brain wiring. Society does not accommodate this and can distress autistic people. Society disables autistic people. Okay? So the key thing here, right, is that both models accept that autistic people are disabled. Yeah? What they differ on is what disables us. So the medical model says we're disabled by our autism. A social model approach says we're disabled by barriers that society puts in our way as autistic people. And it's possible to imagine, although it'd be quite different from this society, it's possible to imagine a society in which we wouldn't be disabled. Because those barriers would have been removed. So in a workplace context, what's the difference, okay, between a social model and a medical model approach? Say you're having a few difficulties at work, right, and you have a meeting with your manager, and I'm going to ask you to use your imagination here, right? I want you to imagine that the manager wants to be helpful. I know that's a bit of a stretch, but apparently there are some out there, okay? And so the manager who wants to be helpful might say to you, tell me how your autism causes you problems at work, okay? We don't want the manager to ask you that. What we want the manager to say is, tell me how work causes problems to you as an autistic worker. Yeah? And one of the things I do in Reading Spectrum is I go around the country teaching trade unionists this, trade union reps, okay? So if you have this meeting with your union rep sitting beside you, if they've been on one of my courses, and the manager says, tell me how your autism causes you problems at work, that union rep will go, whoa, stop there, wrong question, okay? The right question is, tell me how work causes problems to you as an autistic worker. Now, some people think that's a bit of a semantic difference, but it's not. It's a massive difference, okay? Because under the first version, basically what you have to do is slag yourself off, right? You have to go, well, tell me how your autism causes you problems at work. Oh, well, I hate the fluorescent lights in the office. They just, I'm really sensitive to them. When the 11 o'clock meeting doesn't start till 11:45, I can't cope with that. And you're basically just slagging yourself off, right? And there's no use that, is it? Because no one's going to stop you getting wound up by that, because no one's going to stop you being autistic, okay? In the second version of the question, tell me how work causes problems to you as an autistic worker. Then you get to slag the management off. Now, then you get to say things like, those fluorescent lights you have in the office cause me distress and I can't concentrate on my work, okay? Or when you don't start the 11 o'clock meeting until 11:45, that winds me up no end, okay? And in that version, not only are you not slagging yourself off, but you're much more easily clearly pointing to solutions, aren't you? Because then you can say, well, look, if we replace the fluorescent lights with dimmable full spectrum lighting, that'd make things better, wouldn't it? Yeah. If we make sure the 11 o'clock meeting starts at 11 o'clock, that would be really good. Or we really can't start it till 11:45, we'll schedule it for 11:45, okay? So what you're doing is identifying barriers and removing barriers. And you're talking about what's wrong with the workplace, not what's wrong with you. And that's the key thing. Okay, so did you...
Yes, I have some words to share. That I'm really keen on wiki survey or Wikipedia. And a fact, based on English history, I'd like to say that the social model of disability is nothing new. It's a very classic content in our English political culture. That's like in some 18th century, 19th century, when UK is just so Protestant and it's in the continuous sphere of Catholic king and Catholic government officers rambling about the rights of Protestants. Then, in that case, there is a real social disability, but it's about religion. Let me have an example. So, the main target of that disability, the term disability then, is to Jewish and Catholic. The term Catholic disability is actually written in the Secession Act. It means if you are Catholic, you can't be king of you. Yeah. And if you're Catholic, then it limits your right to reach some civil duties, you can't be some civil officers because the society does not permit you, the society finds you to do so. And that is officially, I think that is quite officially or legally called a Catholic disability.
Yeah.
And also for Jewish people, like the Clause 11 of Magna Carta is very anti-Semitic. It says if you borrow loans from Jewish people, you don't need to return it.
Yeah.
And in that case, there is a Jewish disability attached to the clause because you are Jewish, so you don't have the legal rights to your possession of loans.
Yeah.
And that is our very old, very classic root of social model.
So you're right that underlines the approach of the social model of disability, that 100, 150, 200 years ago, disability meant something different from what it does now. It meant that you were some sort of category of person who was excluded by the law from certain things. So it was a gender thing as well. There was a disability associated with being a woman, that you couldn't vote, you couldn't stand for public office, etc. So that is, in a way, we're looking at going back to the original meaning of disability, that it's something that society does to you, rather than it's about where you look for disability. Do you look in the person's head or body, okay, or do you look in the society around them? And the social model is about looking at society around them. So the question I want to pose here is, do we have to change to fit in at work, or can work change so that we can take part? Okay, it won't surprise you to know that I'm angling for the second one of those. And actually, I'm going to mention my book now. I don't have any copies to sell you, so don't worry. I'm not just selling it to you. But the reason I wrote a book called Autism Equality in the Workplace in 2016, and the reason I wrote it was I got hold of a load of books about autism and employment. Okay, so lots of them around. They were all about how autistic people could pretend to be neurotypical in order to fit in at work. Okay, and one of them in particular said to me, write something different. Because there was a bit where this autism coach in America was writing about the story of an autistic guy called Adam, who she was coaching, and Adam was getting in trouble for not making eye contact during meetings. All right, so she trained him to make eye contact during meetings. Now, ring up the management and tell them to stop judging him for not making eye contact in the meetings. You know? So I want us to take an approach that is about, don't change us, change the workplace, change jobs. So, taking a social model approach, it's the workplace that disables us. Okay, so I'm going to talk about next, because I'm an autistic stereotype and everything has to be in lists of 10. 10 ways in which workplaces disable autistic workers. So, note, 10 ways in which being autistic disables autistic workers. 10 ways in which workplaces do. Right, so first of all, getting a job in the first place. A lot of us leave school with qualifications that don't show our true abilities because we were taught and assessed in ways that don't suit us. And not only does that mean we can't show our abilities with our qualifications, it's also probably had a corrosive effect on our self-esteem and confidence as well. Then there's a lack of help in finding the right job. Then there's jobs not being advertised. Only 15% of jobs are publicly advertised. The rest of them, you need to be plugged into some kind of social network to find out about, and we're probably less likely to be plugged in than other people are. And then you have job adverts. Okay, so wouldn't surprise you, would it, to see an advert that says something like, friendly, outgoing team player required for job as computer programmer. Okay? Now, maybe it's just me, but I don't see why you need to be a friendly, outgoing team player to be a computer programmer. Why can't you just sit in the corner programming your computer and only interacting with people when you really have to? So what's happening here is employers are adding irrelevant personal characteristics to job descriptions and adverts. It's a form of personality gatekeeping. Right? They're trying to get people who will go for a drink with them on a Friday night after work and chat about the football with them, etc. By the way, that was a hypothetical example, a real life example. In my last couple of years at London Underground, through the Equality Forum, on which I was I represented RMT, trade union, along with other people. We took them to task for they were advertising for station assistants. They call them customer service assistants, but they're station assistants. And they said, are you helpful? Are you approachable? That's fine. Do you have an outgoing personality? That's not fine. That is not fine. You do not need to have an outgoing personality to tell people how to get from where they are to where they want to go, right? Or to evacuate a train that has become faulty, or to evacuate a station in an emergency, right? You just say, friendly and approachable is fine because, you know, you want to be able to help people, but you don't need to bound across the ticket hall and offer them fries with that, okay? They just want to know how to get to where they're going. And then you get past all that and you get as far as the interviews and other forms of torture, where you get asked ridiculous questions, and when you give them literal replies, because you're autistic and a literal thinker, they think you're taking the piss, don't they? So they say something like, how did you find your last job? And you go, well, I found it in the newspaper. Apparently that's not what they meant. Not what they meant, apparently. And also, a lot of people have been demanding, and some employers are beginning to agree to this, which is good, right? That autistic job applicants be sent the questions in advance. Yes. But I want to expand on that a bit, actually. Much better, everyone's sent the questions in advance. Why should you have to tell a prospective employer that you're autistic? So sometimes when autistic people have asked for the questions in advance, the employer's said, well, that wouldn't be fair on everyone else. So I didn't say you shouldn't send them to everyone else in advance as well. Send them to everyone. Then everyone's got time to think about them. Because if you don't get them in advance, most autistic people will sit there and think about it for 3 or 4 minutes. And meanwhile, they're thinking, who's this weirdo? Why aren't they answering straight away like a neurotypical person would do?
I answered the wrong question. I haven't got a job interview unless my work has been done.
Yeah, absolutely. So, honestly, interviewers, like most neurotypicals, are weird. They talk funny. And they ask you questions that they don't want an answer to. And they say things. They ask questions like, what have you got that the other applicants haven't? How the bloody hell do I know? I haven't met any of the other applicants. I've got no idea. You know? What can you bring to this job? Well, I could bring me boots and me lunchbox. There you go. Yes. Yeah.
You know, they have a certain amount about the skin one they can come through, and they want to know why you think you're the best person.
Yeah.
And that's why, you know, capitalism, baby. Capitalism.
So here's the thing, right? Exams and interviews. Why on earth are we using exams and interviews to hire people for jobs? Okay? Exams only partially test your knowledge of the subject. They mainly test your ability to pass exams. Interviews only partially test your knowledge of the subject. They mainly test your ability to perform in interviews, don't they? So unless your job that you're applying for involves taking exams and being interviewed, they're not very good judges of how well you could do the job. So say you get over all those hurdles. Your second lot of barriers is getting on with the job. All right, so you're going to get an induction in your new job. They're going to tell you all about the technical aspects of the job, but they're not going to tell you anything about the social aspects. Because you're supposed to pick that up. But we don't do that. That's what the neurotypicals do. Okay? So you end up not knowing what you're supposed to do on your breaks, not knowing what subjects it's all right to talk about work and isn't all right to talk about work, etc. You're given some form of training which might or might not suit your learning style. They might just give you a big, wordy manual to read through, and that might suit your learning style, but it might not. And mostly not, yes, indeed. And they overlook our strengths. Oh, do they overlook our strengths? So I represented a guy about 10 years ago on London Underground who was applying to be a train driver. He was autistic. And basically what had happened, he worked on a station. He wanted to work, he told them right from the off he wanted to be a train driver. They sent him to work on a station. Not just any station, by the way. Wembley Park. Wembley Park, the local station for Wembley Stadium. Can you imagine? More of a hellhole for an autistic person to work at. Probably not. Anyway, they sent him the practice paper before he did the driver's exam. And then when he went and did the exam, it was laid out differently from the practice paper. So it freaked him out. He didn't finish it and he failed. Okay. And I took it up with him as his union rep. And we spent a long time explaining autism to these managers, explaining the law to these managers, explaining really basic stuff to these managers who are paid 3 times as much as everyone else because, you know, their knowledge is so superior. Except apparently it wasn't. Anyway, one of the things I thought of, by the way, we got him the job in the end, and he's now been a train driver for 10 years without having any problems or making any mistakes. He now teaches other people to drive trains. So one thing that struck me after all of that process was, sat in these meetings with this worker and these managers for hours and hours and hours, talking about why his autism isn't a problem. And they've never considered whether it might actually be an asset. Now, the guy's autistic special interest since the age of 2 was London Underground train stop. Right? He knows more about London Underground trains than anyone else I've met. And given I worked on London Underground for over 25 years, I know a lot of people who know a lot about London Underground trains. He's the sort of person they should have headhunted for that job. And yet all they ever did was talk about whether it was a problem or not. So, yeah, they overlook our strengths. And then when you apply for a promotion, you just have to go through the same obstacles all over again. The third area in which we have problems is workplace communication, okay? So we may communicate differently from non-autistic people, but workplaces may assume, or usually assume actually, neurotypical methods of communication, disadvantaging those who communicate better in a different style. This is where I get to tell you a funny story, okay? A funny but illustrative story. There was an autistic guy who got a job as a station assistant at Newcastle Central Station, okay? And station assistant is kind of an entry grade dog's body kind of job. And the supervisor wanted him to sweep platform 1, which is the platform from which trains to Carlisle go. So the supervisor said to him, go and sweep the Carlisle platform. Yeah, you've worked out what he did, didn't you? He went and got his broom, he went to platform 1, he waited for the next train, got on it, went all the way to Carlisle, got off, swept the platform, got back on again, came back to Newcastle, reported back to the supervisor about 6 hours later. Where the have you been? Right? He's only done what he's told, isn't he? Personally, I'd love to have been a station supervisor at Carlisle. I'm sitting there, feet on the desk going, no, I'm going to have to go and sweep the platforms in a minute. And then the train comes in, bloke gets off, sweeps them for me and leaves. That would be great. I mean, a slightly more vulgar funny story is that on London Underground, the informal term for an informal break is a blow. And on my first day at work at Oxford Circus Station, the supervisor said to me, go over to the exit gate line and give Derek a blow. Oh, that's not in my job description. No one told me anything about that. Oh, there you go. So workplace jargon can be a massive obstacle. All right. Fourth area in which we have barriers is social interaction. Mainly that there's so much of it. It is exhausting. Sometimes we can actually get through the day and then we go home and just collapse. Can't do anything until the next day. Right. Teamwork. Now, I can accept that some jobs, for example, footballer, require a degree of teamwork. Cristiano Ronaldo's evidently forgotten that, but there you go. However, I think a lot of employers fetishise teamwork. They make a really big thing about it. And you could be part of a team, and actually you could work on your own 90% of the time and then just join in every now and again. But they're putting you in team meetings, team away days, team this, team that, team the other, sending you emails that start team, which really annoys me. Fitting in. The idea that you fit in it. Well, why is it, right? When you have a group of people there and they're not interacting with the one person there, why is this person accused of not fitting in? Rather than these people being accused of excluding that person. It's because when you're in a minority, you get blamed. And insistence on eye contact. They still do this thing where they think that if you're not staring at them, then you're rude or not interested or what have you. Whereas a lot of us find eye contact uncomfortable, even painful, intrusive. And actually, I think it's illogical, because when you have a conversation with someone, the organs you're using are your ears and your mouth. So a social protocol that says you have to lock a completely different part of your body with the other ones, with the other person, it to me is about as rational as insisting people hold hands while having a conversation. But there you go. I told you, neurotypical's weird. All right, so the fifth area in which we have barriers is sensory issues. Workplace environments are usually geared to typical sensitivities, causing distress to people with intense or unusual sensitivity to bright lights or darkness, colour, lovely little animation here, sounds, textures, heat, cold, etc. Or you find it difficult to work in conditions which are overstimulating or cluttered or busy or congested or cramped, which a lot of workplaces are. And here's an example on the sensory issues. Here's an example of another union member I represented when I was on the Underground, Nick. So Nick works on a group of stations, 2 of which have bright fluorescent lighting in the control room, which makes Nick distressed. He also finds the synthetic uniform material uncomfortable, and the company's taking a long time to provide uniform in cotton. He plans his schedule for each day in advance, so when his duties are changed at short notice, this is upsetting. And his manager agreed adjustments that he's not given duties at those 2 stations and that his duties are not changed at short notice. But he's repeatedly found himself being allocated duties at the wrong stations and having his duties changed at short notice and having to, excuse me, I've got these reasonable adjustments, etc. And that's one of the reasons, and I'll probably repeat this point over and over again, why reasonable adjustments for individuals are good, workplace change is better. Okay? Because actually much better would have been to just get rid of those fluorescent lights and put some full spectrum lighting in instead, rather than making a reasonable adjustment just for him. Okay, the 6th area in which workplaces disable us is the way that work is organised. It's like not every workplace is a factory, but most of them think they are, and most of them function like they are, and therefore everyone is expected to work in exactly the same way and exactly the same speed. And so it can cause us problems by distracting us or interrupting us or creating problems with time management or the pace of work or perfectionism. The employer probably wants you to make 20 saleable widgets every hour where you want to make 5 perfect ones. Okay, so, yes, the trouble with managers. I could do a whole separate talk on this, but we'll just have the one slide. All right, trouble with managers. They don't know much about neurodiversity. That bit isn't their fault, right? Because they haven't been trained about neurodiversity by their managers, have they? You do get manager favoritism, blue-eyed boy and girl syndrome, and if you're the workplace weirdo, you are probably less likely to be one of the manager's favourites. Disruptive supervision, standing behind you, telling you to do it differently. You worked out a way to do the job that works for you, and they're trying to tell you to do it differently. Bossiness in general. And performance management and attendance management, 2 of the most horrible things about the modern workplace, which are all set out in everyone has the same targets, they're all tick boxes, they take no account of differences between people. Okay, so here's an example of some poor management of oh look, another London Underground worker. Simon, all right, so Simon's autistic train driver. Simon received instruction from service control to take his train out of service at the station he was approaching. Control could have given this instruction earlier, but did not. As Simon took the train into the sidings, he passed the signal at danger. A manager interviewed him, asking why this had happened. He didn't say how much detail he wanted, so Simon, who was already anxious because he was in trouble, gave a lot of information about himself, including he was autistic. And the manager instantly decided that this was the reason he'd made a driving error. He ignored all other factors, and Simon was stood down from driving, which means he wasn't allowed to drive trains. He had to work on the station for a while. His union rep, that was me. So his union rep asked the manager to arrange a cognitive assessment, which showed that Simon was able to drive trains and identify ways to support him. And now he's driving trains again. That whole process took nearly 2 years. Right, which not only was horrible for Simon, all right, not knowing whether he was going to keep his job and having to work on stations when he'd much rather be driving a train, but London Underground, publicly owned company, public money, paying him a train driver's wage, to do a station assistant's job. Not a good use of public money. Okay, so the 8th area in which we have barriers is bullying, harassment and discrimination. We probably know about that. Far too many autistic workers get mocked or belittled, get excluded socially, get seen as eccentric or weird, or particularly for stimming. So you might be an autistic worker who, to get through the day, likes to pop out of the car park and skip sideways around it for 2 minutes every couple of hours. Yeah, that might help you get through the day, might help you regulate yourself, etc. Do that and you will soon become known as the workplace weirdo. And yet no one has yet been able to explain to me how that is different from a neurotypical person needing to pop out and have a fag every couple of hours. Right, we all have different ways of getting through the working day, don't we? It's just that some are acceptable and apparently some aren't. Not surprisingly, a lot of us stay in the closet and don't know whether to disclose being autistic or not. Or change. Okay, but it's well known, we don't like change. Whether it's disruption to the daily schedule or changes to the way we work or major reorganisations. But actually there's one type of change that is worse than any other type of change. Imposed change. Your boss turns up and says, right, we're going to do everything differently now. You're going to do that differently. Your job title's changed. We're relocating to another city 50 miles away. Okay? And we're going to get into trade unions in a minute, all right? And one of the most important roles of a trade union here is to insist that any kind of workplace change is negotiated. And being negotiated, you can then raise the issues. It means it comes in over time. It means you can be engaged with the process, etc. And then our final 10th barrier is job insecurity in a time of austerity. I think we're still in the time of austerity, maybe not now. But we have been since 2008, and there's been a massive growth in temporary, casual and 0 hours contracts, which aren't great for anybody, but if you're an autistic person who relies on routine and you don't find out what you're doing at work on a particular day until you get a text message at 7 o'clock the previous evening, then that's just unbearable. It's intolerable. There's job cuts, redundancies, unemployment, and even if we're not the people whose jobs get cut, we end up doing the jobs of the people whose jobs do get cut, and your workload goes up and pressure increases, and that's going to have a particularly severe effect on us. So, making the workplace more autism friendly. How do we do that? We identify barriers and then we remove those barriers. Okay, so I'm not going to go back through the entire list of 10 things suggesting ways of removing the barriers, because what I want people to get in the habit of doing is identifying the barriers and coming up with ideas of how to remove them. But here are some examples. Okay, a personal workstation. Better still, ban hot desking completely. But if you do have that nonsense, then at least an autistic person should be able to have a personal workstation and not have to not know what desk they'll be working at until they turn up at work each day. Frequent breaks to get a break from the sensory overload or the social interaction or whatever. Quiet space, every workplace should have one. Full spectrum dimmable lighting. Mentoring can help to have a mentor at work, and control over how you work. So yeah, I mean, maybe if the autistic worker or the ADHD worker can't sit still and concentrate through a 4-hour-long boring meeting, maybe the autism and ADHD isn't the problem. Maybe the 4-hour-long boring meeting is the problem. Okay, but to repeat a point I made earlier, I'm going to say it again because I think it's so important. Reasonable adjustments for autistic individuals are good. Changing the workplace is better. Okay? People's go-to thing tends to be, what reasonable adjustments can I have? And that is important. But I think it's plan B. Plan A is an accessible job. Because if the job was accessible to start with, it wouldn't need adjusting. Every time a reasonable adjustment is agreed, it's an admission of failure. It's an admission of inaccessibility. Because if something needs adjusting, it's because it wasn't accessible to you in the first place. So, next little point I want to make is, sorry, I'm skipping on the time there. Oh, it's on my screen. Is to encourage you to know your rights. Okay, including your right to freedom from discrimination. And discrimination legally comes in lots of different forms. Freedom from harassment. Reasonable adjustments. the right to complain, to take out grievances and not be punished for that, and the right to join and be represented by a trade union. And I want to emphasise that point now, because if you're not getting your rights, what are you going to do about it? Well, you can fight it on your own if you want, okay? But fight it as part of a union, then you are a lot stronger. So, yeah, go on.
Tell me a good union that is not garbage.
Okay. So the reason I'm not going to say to you join a union, because they're all perfect. Okay, they're not. What unions are is organisations of workers, right? And workers aren't all perfect, so their organisations aren't going to be all perfect. And actually, most of them are quite bureaucratic. But a lot of them have made a lot of good progress on disability rights. Okay, so certainly on London, RMT on London Underground has saved the jobs of, well, I can think of at least 6 autistic workers in the last couple of years who were about to go down the road until the union rep got involved, etc. And I think yeah, a lot of unions are getting much better. If you want one example of a union I think is quite good on it, believe it or not, the Fire Brigades Union. The Fire Brigades Union this year, for the first time, set up a disabled and neurodivergent members forum. And that's in an industry where most people think, well, the disabled people don't do that. They can't fight fires. Well, actually, they can. And there appears to be a disproportionate number of dyslexic people in the fire service. For instance, it might be due to it being a job that doesn't involve much reading and writing, but also it might be because it's a job that involves navigating your way around buildings, right? And dyslexic people are significantly better than average at that. Not that many people know that. So yeah, my answer to your question is the Fire Brigades Union. They are properly getting. You can't join it unless you work in the fire brigade, though. But lots of unions are really making an effort now. Now, more than 75% of union members are now in a union that has a specific disabled members structure in it. So, like a disabled members committee that enables us to bring up our issues. Yeah.
Yeah, some of them as well. I'm one of these.
What's that?
It's a black cab.
A black cab?
There are some neurodivergent black cabs as well.
Yeah. Good. Excellent.
You can't be neurodivergent, you've got series.
Yeah, indeed. Ridiculous. Quite. So, what can a union do? There's power in a trade union. It can represent you as an individual. That might be in you trying to get reasonable adjustments. It might be in a grievance. It might be you might be in trouble. They can represent you as an individual. They can campaign for collective workplace change as well. Now, that might be for a change that's specifically good for autistic workers, like getting rid of the fluorescent lights. Or it might be something that's good for everyone, including us, like a shorter working week. That would be good, wouldn't it? So I'm going to go off on a tangent about a shorter working week, because I was at a parliamentary thing on autism and employment several years ago. And there was a discussion going on about how a lot of autistic people can't work full time, right? And everyone was accepting this point, and everyone else on the panel, except me, was saying, yeah, there must be more opportunities to work part-time. And then it comes to me, and I say, I agree, there must be more opportunities to work part-time, okay? But I want to go further than that and say we should rethink what we mean by a full-time working week. Because working 48 hours a week, not acceptable for anybody, right? And perhaps if the full-time working week was, 32 hours over 4 days, then a lot more autistic people would be able to work full-time. Or if they work part-time, it would be a bigger proportion of the full-time working week, and therefore a bigger proportion of the pay. Okay, so, and it can also provide education and training, and that's where I get to say, I run education and training for trade unions about autism and neurodiversity. Have a word with yours. And that actually is the end of my talk. So I go to any questions or comments.
Hello. So stymied me in the workplace a lot was complaint systems.
Was what, sorry?
The complaint system.
Oh, the complaint system, yeah.
Because they went round in houses.
Oh, yes.
But yeah, we can't deal with this now because you didn't do this in this order.
Yeah.
Even though you couldn't do it in that order because guess what? You sure soldiers the visual, well, other people don't exist.
Yeah.
And what do? Or they would
had a so we have a discussion that you had to see that they had to have their opportunity to do something, and they would time you out. And they would wait, they would drag out a discussion to 3 months. They go, well, yeah, you can't have a complaint now.
Yeah.
You can't take it to tribunal now because you timed out.
Yeah.
So if you still have a problem, I'm sure they're hiring down the road.
Yeah.
They said, no, they said, you're not a problem. You're maybe not really a victim here. And that's a very good,
Yeah.
very keen phrase they have. But how, even with trading, I was a teacher, so trade union teachers were terrible. People I contacted that had said, look, I've got a problem. So severe gaslighting going on with my manager stuff. Things are then losing and changing to make me look conscious where actually it's their failure to provide information. And they go, did you declare you were autistic on the form? And I said, well, no, I didn't, because the form says...
Because I don't have to.
A disability that you need accommodation for. Well, I have my own accommodation, so I did not require anyone else to do so. No, I said, no, I did not. And they said, oh, yeah, well, that's summary dismissal then.
Well, can you what there? You made to declare.
But so easy to declare, you know, it's not what. And that was the union that said that, so we should probably try this.
Okay, so guess what I'm going to say you should do if your union rep's rubbish? Become the union rep yourself.
That's what I did.
Hooray! There you go. A fine example right there.
So my story, I had a terrible time at work when I was a union rep and I was well supported within the union, etc. But the question I wanted to ask was what happens in educational settings? Because I spent many years trying to train as a therapist in various tracers, but never completed any training because of the level of discrimination I encountered. But no protects people on training.
Okay, so for most vocational training, the trade union for that industry has student membership. Okay, so if you're a trainee teacher, you can join the National Education Union. If you're a trainee physiotherapist, you can join the... Yeah, that's what it's called, yeah, the Charter Society of Physiotherapists. So if it's a vocational training that you're doing, call up the union for that industry and say, can I join? And they'll probably say, yes, it'll be £1 a year or something like that because they want to get you in. There you go. Yeah. Hello.
All right, so I guess a two-element question. I've always believed that if you come with myself anyway, like adding organisations that say that disability can't do, I'm not always being honest. So when you go to the interview, don't necessarily unmask. It would be helpful to after you've gotten the job. And then, then unmasked, even though they could get you on, not being entirely honest. So if you unmask them, they can't really make a claim against you because that would be sort of discrimination. Is this a group? Now, as a union person, I just do a security job where I did I put a night shift and then I was put on a mental health training straight after. So I finished the night shift at 6 in the morning and then I started mental health training at 9 a.m. after that. Now I was in my probation periods. I don't know if they could tell with me or the words on the I haven't been diagnosed, but it's just like really and truthfully, companies are robbed in that regard. As soon as recourse to I do, could I go to the league?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, that's an interesting one. On that one, you can actually go to the working time regulations. Again, the working time regulations, which says you have to have a certain amount of time between shifts and a certain amount of breaks every 20 minutes, every 5 hours, something. But breaks between shifts as well. But it tends to be ignored in workplaces where there isn't a union organised to make them follow it. So I think that would probably be the answer to that one. God, there was something else I was going to say. Yeah. You are under no obligation at all to tell them you're autistic. And they are not allowed to ask, okay, except under certain defined circumstances. All right? And the defined circumstances is they can ask you things about whether you have any kind of impairment that would prevent you doing a core part of the job. But that wouldn't take the form of, are you autistic? You know, they can ask something like, are you all right with working at heights? If the job involves working at heights. They can't say, do you have a diagnosis of vertigo? You know, it's not the diagnosis that's the issue. One of the few times in which they can ask you you're autistic is if they need to hire an autistic person. So positive discrimination is allowed within the law. So if you were, I don't know, if you are one-to-one Enfield or something, and you were hiring an autistic peer support worker or something, then you could ask the applicants whether they're autistic because it's a peer support worker, you want to hire an autistic person for it.
So I don't have a mask. I'd apply for several times. And because of this, I find it very difficult to get interviews because, you know, I have to say that I'm autistic because I have to explain this. So I have not worked in the way that I used to since about 2021. Because getting interviews is just you know, it's lovely for people and lots, but I've never done it. I don't know how to do it. And it's very difficult to get a job if you are mentoring aiming with space and you do not look kind and you look by behave. If you obviously do not behave like a neurotypical person, it's bouncing off me.
And that's another reason why interviews are a crap way of recruiting people.
Yeah.
Because you get judged on irrelevant personal characteristics. And it seems really obvious to me, but isn't the best way of judging whether someone can do a job to get them to do the job? Like, if you're an actor and you're applying for a part in Macbeth at the National Theatre, right, how would they assess your application? Right? You'd do an audition. You wouldn't do an exam on, you know, vocal intonations in the role of Banquo or what have you. If you were a footballer and your life's ambition was to play for Peterborough United, because why wouldn't it be? How would they judge whether to sign you or not? They'd come and watch you play football. They wouldn't interview you about how you play football. You know, so why don't we apply that process to everything else? Then things like how you come across won't be relevant, because they're not relevant in most jobs, are they?
From the first one, the example that you gave about being a rep, to go in words as if that your workplace is recognised as a union entity. There wasn't a union representation in that situation. I don't think applies. It was, you know, I've been in the past a pub organisation that didn't have union representation. There are those that are to that don't have union representation, and they'll never have it. There is no chance to say make it. The answer is no, it's nothing to happen, and you have to find another way back to work that. So you have to think, when I think about my own things, I think about alternative ways I can get around. One of the things I do try and do is engage legal representation on minority people, and they engage well. People they don't engage well enough, and they haven't qualified enough. The only other thing that I found quite strongly working, because of this commonly got professional report better on that, that I found that ACAS to be kind of supportive.
Yes.
I found that ACAS to have quite source with the terms of advice, and sometimes they will just give you the same advice that by humans. And sometimes they have caseloads that are not all in someone's constructive, but in ways feel quite strongly about the stroke can be and of the ACAS.
Yes.
And the way that it can help workers, and particularly in the case of you want them freedoms, they advise you on this threshold to do that and in finding this process. And because sometimes it's ACAS, it can lead to a less offensive, because if it's a union, and particularly very large companies, they give you out the way we're coming from an ACAS data, particularly as independent, so how do you spend stuff for it? You can encourage heading review because it's important to contribute to the way that we build. But at the same time, sometimes they can go as a more indirect route into work.
Yeah.
Strong and shouldn't strength.
Yeah.
For those of us who can't,
Sure.
we're not in a safe position to see.
Yeah. 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 Good point. Just a couple of things on that. Okay. So union recognition. I was going to say I'm lucky enough to have only ever worked in jobs where unions are recognised, but that's actually because I only ever apply for jobs in which unions are recognised. But if you're not, then there are laws that make employers recognise unions. You have to have a vote, or you have to get 50% plus one of staff in a membership.
For my employee base with caption of interest, and there is nothing I could do to convince them because it would be against
Yeah.
their interests. It's not in a certain private sector.
Yeah.
It's physically just in. It is not possible. And you're now asking an autistic person who has social communication skills.
Yeah.
to try and convince neurotypicals.
Yeah.
You tell me how that would work.
No, I mean, what I would recommend is not necessarily that you unionise it on your own, but you get the union to come and help you do it. Now, there aren't many more anti-union employers than Amazon, but the GMB has just secured recognition at Amazon in Coventry.
But Amazon makes a boom back. It's not like the middle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also in some places.
Yeah. Another interesting fact to know is you can become a union health and safety rep even if your employer doesn't recognise a union. Okay, because the law says that staff in any workplace are entitled to have a health and safety representative, and if there is a union present in the workplace, whether it's recognised or not, if there's a union present, then the union gets to decide who the staff's health and safety representative is. So you could look at doing that. But I do understand it's not everybody's bag being a union rep. It's great fun, but it's not something everyone can do. So, yeah, ACAS can help you as an individual. It's not going to organise to change your workplace, but it can definitely help you as an individual. They're having a neurodiversity conference next spring, by the way. I know that's a long time away, but I'm speaking at that. Very cool. I think we've run out of time, haven't we? I think I was getting some hard stares from the organiser then. Thank you very much.